Today we're going to be learning about the distance and midpoint formula. First, here is an example of what the two formulas look like. So when we want to use the distance formula, we're trying to find the length of sides, for instance, in like a triangle, or the distance between 2 points. So in the formula, you have x sub 2 minus x sub 1, and that quantity is squared, plus y sub 2 minus y sub 1 quantity squared. The subscripts represent which ordered pair you're looking at. So x sub 2 would be the x value of the second ordered pair, minus x sub 1, which would be the x value of the first ordered pair, and same idea for the y's. When you want to find a midpoint, as you might assume, it's the middle of a segment. So we would be using this when we want to find the middle of a side or the midpoint of 2 points. And for the formula, it's an average of the distances, so x sub 1 plus x sub 2 divided by 2, and y sub 1 plus y sub 2 divided by 2. Notice that this is an ordered pair, so you have the parentheses, and then separation by the comma. So here's how we go about using the distance formula. So here's an example where we're asked to find the distance between the point 1, 4 and negative 5, 10. So the first thing we're going to do is label our points, x sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, y sub 2. And again, 1, this would be like x sub 1 because it's the first x. 4 would be y sub 1 because it's the first y. Then over here, x sub 2, y sub 2. So in the formula here, I'm going to write d for distance. So the distance is equal to, here I'm just setting up what the formula looks like. So in the first parentheses, it's x sub 2, negative 5, minus x sub 1, which is 1. And then plus y sub 2, which is 10, minus y sub 1, which is 4. Then it says simplify what's in the parentheses. So we're just going to use order of operations. So negative 5 minus 1 is negative 6. I'll still have to square it, but in the next parentheses, 10 minus 4 is 6. And we have to square that too. So then we square what's in each set of parentheses. Negative 6 squared is positive 36, and positive 6 squared is also positive 36. And 36 and 36 is 72. And for right now, we're going to leave it like this under the radical. So this would be how we use the distance formula. For using the midpoint formula, we start off the same way by labeling the points. So x sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, and y sub 2. And this time, so I'm going to use m for midpoint. So again, it's an ordered pair. So I'm going to add the x's together. So 1 plus negative 5. Then I'll divide by 2. Then 4 plus 10 and divide by 2. So now we'll simplify the numerators. So 1 plus a negative 5 is the same as 1 minus 5. That's negative 4. We'll divide by 2. Then we'll take 4 plus 10, which is 14, and divide by 2. So that gives us a final answer of negative 2, 7. And again, like I said, this is an ordered pair for the answer. And the idea here is if I were to graph these, for instance, this isn't going to be perfect, but let's say like 1, 4 is right here, and then negative 5, 10 is somewhere up here. Negative 2, 7 would be in the middle, and that's what we would have just found. Now for some examples. I'm going to do the example that's on the left, and then you guys will do the example that's on the right. So we begin by labeling our points. Then we plug them in to the formula. So inside the parentheses we add, inside the parentheses we subtract. Then we square it and we add in between them. So inside you subtract, but between them you add. So first one is going to be x2, so that's negative 6, minus a negative 4. Notice that I'm leaving the two subtraction signs there. And then for the y's, negative 10 minus negative 2. Next up, we simplify what's in each parentheses. So negative 6 plus 4 is negative 2. I'll have to square it, and then I add it to negative 10 plus 2, which is negative 8, and then square it. Negative 2 squared is 4. Negative 8 squared is 64. And then we add them, and that's radical 68. So for right now, we're leaving our answers as an unsimplified radical. If you are asked to round, so in your assignment for Delta Math, you're going to be asked to round to the nearest tenth. I would type this into the calculator, and this is, or rounds, to be 8.2. And then I'll let you guys take care of the second one here. The answer, though, you'll see is down here at the bottom. You should end up with radical 125. Now for some midpoint examples. Begin the same way, label your points. Plug them into the formula. So we add the x's, 2 plus negative 5 divided by 2. And then add the y's and divide by 2. Negative 4 plus negative 5 divided by 2. So 2 minus 5 is negative 3 halves. Negative 4 plus negative 5 is negative 9 halves. You can leave them as simplified fractions, or you could say this is negative 1.5 and negative 4.5. Just like before, I'll let you guys do the right-hand side, and the answer is down there, 5 and 3.5. All right, now the last thing you're going to have to be able to do is, it has to do with the midpoint formula, or at least the concept of a midpoint. But this time you're not asked to find the middle point between the endpoints. You're asked to find one of the remaining endpoints. First thing I need you to do is, I do have a typo on the notes. Right here, please change that y coordinate to be negative 14. So here's what the setup is. I've got a graph here, and this isn't going to be perfect, but let's say the point down here, this is the point, negative 2, negative 14. And then up here, this is the point, 1, 5. So, and then I'm going to have to change this also a little bit here. We're going to say that negative 2, negative 14 is the endpoint, and 1, 5 is the midpoint. So the question here is, what's the other endpoint? So if this were a segment, negative 2, negative 14 is an endpoint. 1, 5 is a midpoint. Somewhere else up here is another endpoint. So endpoint, midpoint, endpoint. And the question is, what is that ordered pair that represents that unknown endpoint? So here's how we're going to reason through this. If we take a look at the endpoint we have, which is negative 2, negative 14, I want you to think about how you would move to get to the midpoint. So let's talk about the x's. So if I start here, this is an x value of negative 2. How far do I have to move to get to an x value of 1? And so that idea would be that, well, I would have to move negative 2 to negative 1 to 0 to 1. I would have to move 3 spaces. So if I add 3, I can get to the midpoint x value. So then from the midpoint, if I move 3 again, I'll get to the new endpoint's x value. So if I'm starting at 1 and I add 3 to 1, that would put me at an x value of 4. Now we'll go back and we'll talk about what's going on with those y's. Well, I start down here at negative 14. So how far away do I have to go, or sorry, how far do I have to go to get from negative 14 to positive 5? Well, negative 14 right to the axis, that's 14, plus 5 more, that's 19. So I had to add 19 to get to 5. Well, then I can repeat that to get to the endpoint again. So from 5, I need to add 19. So 5 plus 19 is 24. And so we would know then that this endpoint is at 424. One way you can think about this is, even though this creates like a diagonal segment, we know that just logically, we would have 2 endpoints, and then those 2 endpoints would be cut in half by a location of the midpoint. So if I take what I know, so I said that the endpoint we have, we're going to say was -2, -14. The midpoint is at 1, 5, and the question is, what are these 2 things? Well, the midpoint is the same distance from each of those things. So if I find out, well, how far away is -2 to 1? Well, I just have to add 3 to -2 when I get to 1. Well, then to get from the midpoint to the new endpoint, I also have to add 3. So 1 plus 3 gives me 4. Similarly, if I talk about the y's, how do I get from -14 to 5? Well, I have to add 19. So then to get from the midpoint to the new endpoint, I'd also have to add 19. So then I'd have 5 plus 19, and that's where that 24 comes from. So again, this was 4, 24. So now I'll let you try this one. So if you want, you can like just graph it straight up as it would look in a coordinate plane, or you can think about this sort of setup. The endpoint is at 0, -4. The midpoint is at 12, -6. And I'm trying to find out where this endpoint is. So think, what do you need to do to get from 0 to 12? In other words, what do you add or subtract from 0 to get to 12? And then do that same thing to get your x value. Then, what do you add or subtract from -4 to get to -6? And do that same thing to get the y coordinate. The answer you should end up with is down here at the bottom. Good luck. Your homework tonight is in Delta Math. Be sure to show your work, please.